Research concerning the effects of stress on health is well developed, and there is a prolific field called behavioral medicine that focuses on the relationship between stressors and health, including diet, stressful experiences, other behaviors that might lead to deleterious health outcomes. And our emotions can facilitate stress, which can have deleterious effects on health. When someone is in a high stress situation, they might have plaque buildup in their heart vasculature. They may have increased visceral fat around their stomach, which is unhealthy. There are a lot of downstream physiological effects of stress. In the late 1970s, stress was defined as any nonspecific response of the body to any demand made upon it. Now, that was really broad, but at the time, it was thought that general adaptation syndrome was like a stress response. We have external stimuli or internal emotions that generate threat to the body, and then we have a general response to stress. And within this general adaptation syndrome, we have the alarm stage, so the increased sympathetic nervous system activity. Our nervous system is responding to what's going on in our environment or to our emotions causing stress, and we have increased cortisol release, which is a stress hormone. We have epinephrine release in the body during that alarm stage. During the resistance stage, our sympathetic activity, it does decline, but we still have some behaviors, physiological things that are going on in the body, such as long-term release and distribution of cortisol, that stress hormone, throughout the body. And lastly, we have the exhaustion stage. That's after prolonged stress within this general adaptation syndrome, and you can no longer keep up with that response. There's a book, something called like Why Zebras Never Get Ulcers. The idea is that our stress response is adaptive. In an environment of evolutionary adaptation, it helped us to survive. If you're out on the African savanna, you're running from a lion, that's a quality stress response, right, that you're having. It's meaningful. But if you're having a stress response like increased heart rate, cortisol release, epinephrine release because you're taking my quiz, then we have a problem. It doesn't match up with the lifestyle that we have. Robert Sapolsky has done a lot of research on stress, and he has argued that our crises that we have currently are more prolonged. We have stress at work, we have stress at school, and that doesn't match up with our physiological processes that were developed during a time that we were hunters and gatherers. And so for that reason, he uses the stress response to explain why we have stress-related illnesses and psychiatric problems. In the 80s and 90s, Robert Sapolsky went to Africa and lived out in the savannah with baboons. Now, baboons are a really great model for studying the stress response because they just exist in one social hierarchy. They're not like humans that have a social hierarchy at home and a social hierarchy at work. They just have one social hierarchy. But baboons are also a good model for stress because their physiology is similar to humans. So he was out there investigating their role in the social hierarchy, their stressful interactions, and then he would blow dart them and take a sample and get cortisol, that stress hormone, from them. And he found that there were long-term deleterious health effects of stress experienced by these baboons. And at the same time, the British National Health Service was doing the Whitehall study, which covered tens of thousands of people over a series of decades, and they found that people that were lower ranked in the British National Health System were more likely to experience stress, and then they had increased risk for cardiopulmonary disorders and other stress-related health problems. Within stress, we can study the HPA axis, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal cortical axis. It is integrated with our sympathetic nervous system, and it involves the hypothalamus and pituitary gland in the brain and the adrenal cortex on the kidneys. And it is the elicited physiological response to stress. The hypothalamus will contact the pituitary gland and ask it to release adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH. And then that has downstream activity on the adrenal glands on top of the kidneys, and those secrete that stress hormone cortisol. And cortisol, on the short term, is adaptive. It helps us have energy to fight in a difficult situation, but again, when it's long term, it's deleterious. And so this is a depiction of that HPA axis. The field of psychology that collides with immune system work is psychoneuroimmunology, and we can investigate the ways that the immune system interacts with psychological activity. It's a pretty cool area. So if you're interested in that, I do suggest that you read Sapolsky's work. I would start with A Primate's Memoir, which is a really cool memoir of his time in Africa studying baboons. But just remember, the prolonged stress response is really bad for health. We can get depression, a weakened immune system, cardiopulmonary disorders, and it can even harm your brain tissue.